How's it going, everyone? We are doing another book review today. We are going to cover Norse Magic and Runes by History Brought Alive. The subtitle for this book is A Guide to the Magic, Rituals, Spells, and Meanings of Norse Magic Mythology and Reading the Elder Futhark Runes. Now, first things first. I will always strive to be as genuine as possible on this channel. But I also don't want to throw shade, especially when it comes to a subject that I'm not specialized in or an expert in. But for a book that is called History Brought Alive, or from a publisher known as History Brought Alive, I wonder about some of the things that are in here, and some of the things that aren't. For instance, something as important as the Aesir, there seems to be two missing, and then a few of the Vanir seem to be up for debate as well. There are some of the traditional views that might be more modern than this book leads on. So if you're looking for historical accuracy, it's not that this book is way off or wrong or worthless, but you might look into something more like Tales of Norse Mythology by Helen Gerber, or look into the original prose and Eddas and sagas. Those are going to be more accurate. That being said, this book is not without value. There's definitely some utility in this book. I've made about a dozen bookmarks to cover here, so let's get into that. The very beginning of this book is sort of a welcome and an introduction, and it covers the time frame and the people, as opposed to their beliefs and their practices and things like that. It covers, in chapter 1, the time and people, more than just Norsemen, daily life, slavery, women, more than just Vikings, different ventures, Icelandic settlements, conflicts and raids, their influence, the Celts, and the Norse Gaels. After that, we get into the chapter of the gods and realms. And this covers the pantheon, and goes into listing the Aesir, Odin, Thor, Loki, all of those, and it gives a little bit of a description. Under Odin, we have known as the All-Father, God of War, which is up for dispute. A lot of people would say that Tyr is the God of War, but again, if you're getting into this book for historical accuracy, you might be barking up the wrong tree. This seems like more of a general primer, but it goes over the Aesir. Under Odin, it says, known as the All-Father, King of Asgard, bearer of wisdom and searcher of truth. Odin forms the head in the triad of the mightiest gods, next to Thor and Freya. He was considered the first Seithman, or male seer, and he is known for his fervent pursuit of knowledge and is both revered for his standing in the pantheon as a war leader and also shamed for his practice of Seither magic, which is seen as a weakness and in the use of it by men. And that is something that I always found kind of funny, is like back in the day when I was still using like Facebook and stuff like that, like you'd always, and this was a while ago, this was over a decade ago, but you would see like posts where people would have like a picture of like Odin, and it would have a caption like, are you going to be the toughest man you can be today? Or are the All-Father wants your manliness on display, or something like that. And I always thought that was kind of funny, because Odin wasn't necessarily a man's man. He wasn't exactly effeminate, but he was a seeker. He he was interested in wisdom and Seidr and presumably Galdr, and other practices that were not the most manly practices, especially for that time period and shortly after. Then it goes in to talk about Thor and Loki and Balder and Heimdall. I believe there's two others. Yeah, but anyway, like I said, this isn't necessarily a book about to be historically accurate. Then it goes into a section about the Valkyries. It goes into the cosmology, the 9 realms. Here it lists the 9 realms as Godheim, Alfheim, Svartalfheim, Niflheim, Muspelheim, Mannheim or Midgard, Jotunheim, Nidavellir, and Vanaheim. So, moving on from the realms, then we get into some descriptions about Yggdrasil and the Norns from the Voluspa. Then it talks about Ragnarok, the trolls, dwarves, elves, and giants. And there's a section for each. The trolls, the dwarves, the elves, the giants. Then we get into the myth and folklore and the Eddas and stuff like that. It talks about Poetic Edda. It says Poetic Edda or Elder Edda is a compilation of Icelandic and Norwegian tales that first appeared in the 13th century and is contained in the Codex Regius or Royal Book. Many other poems were added to the Poetic Edda over the years and were composed with visionary force and dramatic equality. The Poetic Edda was more often written in an Eddic genre of poetry and follows these 4 rules. The author is anonymous. It uses a certain meterage. It has a direct approach to word order, and kennings, ancient figures of speech, are used less. It goes into the... So we've got the Poetic Edda, then the Prose Edda. We've got the Icelandic sagas. And then it actually goes into to tell some summaries of some of the stories. Here we have one from Skirnismal. Then we have Frithjof's saga. Then we have Grimnismal. We have Skaldskaparmal, the kidnapping of Idun. We have Scandinavian folklore and the Huldra, the Nissa, Pesta, Nokken, the Draugr. Then we get into a section on Seidr, Spa, and Galdr. So, this is one of the reasons that I was interested in the book as I was flipping through it. These sections are very short, but they do sort of highlight large parts of the practice. It goes into its connection to shamanism, it goes into its explanation, and then it goes into actually performing the stuff and the actual practice itself. It goes into derivations, where the words come from. So first we get into Seidr, and then we get into Spa, and then we get into Galdr. And how to perform. It doesn't necessarily like do this and do that, but it tells sort of what the meaning behind them are. Then we get into a chapter about the rune stones and Odin's gift. It gets into the elder Futhark and the younger Futhark. There are some rune poems to help you remember the meanings of the runes / for pathworking, invocations, and things like that. I do not speak, presumably, Danish, I think is... Anyway, I do not speak this language, but I'm going to do my best to grit my teeth through this. For instance, the poem for Fe, or Fehu, or Fiu, is Feir Frandarog, Ok Flever Viti, Ok Grafseids Gata, Aurum Filkir. and that means source of discord among kinsmen, and fire of the sea, and path of the serpent. So these can be used much like Paul Foster Case's or Linda Filorio's incantations. Moving on. So yeah, for those of you that are into more like baneful things, like you could use the poem for Hegel or Hagalaz. Moving on. Once we get through the idea of the runes, it gets into something that you don't hear a lot about, which are the 3 Aetir. These are the 3 sections or segments or regions of the runes. They are broken up into 8s, and so we have what's often called the mother or the healer Aetir. Then we have the king or the mystic Aetir. And then we have the last 8, which belong to the warrior Aetir. So that's an interesting concept, that the runes themselves are further, I guess, fragmented, you would say, into more specific energies. And these can be used for meditation, for casting, for pathworking, etc., etc., etc. It also can affect the way that you do your rune readings. Whenever I do my rune readings, I have an actual stave that is inscribed on the plate, and that stave reminds me to consider the Aetir, or the 3 segments, and that can help you translate your divinations, as well as learning geomancy. I have recently taken up the study and science of geomancy, because I noticed often enough that the runes were falling in what I recognized to be geomantic figures. So, just a few tips for increasing your rune readings, if people even are still reading runes these days. That's one of my go-tos. Moving on. This says here, I have this sort of asterisk. What you might also notice is how the overlapping of some themes do not reflect in the third 8. Like death found in Perthro and Heimdall's Et, and Raidho and Freyr's Et. Tyr's Et does not indicate this theme, telling us that maybe the warrior had already come to learn all those lessons and moved to the next stage, where Freyr and Heimdall still need to make choices. Something to consider. Then we get into actual rune spreads and rune layouts. There's 1, 2, and 3 rune layouts, 4 rune, 5 rune layouts, 7 rune layouts. And just an example, the 7 rune layout. The first rune can represent the feelings that you had in the past relating to the question asked. The second rune can be read as the struggles and bumps you will face on the journey to the outcome. The third rune points toward our concern at the present time while we take the journey. The fourth rune, we can begin to acknowledge our journey toward an outcome even though there's still some way to go. The fifth tells us about our feelings once we can begin to see the outcome at hand. The sixth rune is a reminder of the struggles ahead even though the outcome is visible. And the final rune is the representation of the goal at hand. This goal can be deceiving though, because just like the serpent of Midgard that bites its own tail, if you are not careful enough when reading the previous runes, you could end up finding yourself right back at the beginning again. Then there is a 24 rune layout which uses 3 rows. The first row is related to the mother Aether, or the mother Aet, and then the second row is related to the mystic or king's Et, and then the third row relates to the warrior. And so the first one relates to Fi, which is wealth, and the second one relates to Uruz, which is strength. The third one relates to defense and destruction, Thorn. Okay, so for those of you who are more familiar with runes, you see where I'm going with this. I'm not going to bore you. Chapter 7 gets into religion, public and private faith, things like that, death, reincarnation. And then there's something interesting that I noticed that was sort of maybe related to Kabbalah in a sense. In Kabbalah, we have the neshama, the ruach, the nefesh, and the guf, or the gyuv. Well, this book talks about parts of the soul. And I'm not trying to draw a direct correlation between these. I'm just trying to point out similarities. So we have the hamr, which was one's physical appearance. It could change and was associated with shape-shifting. So that's related very much to the physical body and the guf. The hugr was the person's character and personality which followed them after death. This is very much like the ruach, the ego, the soul of the person. Then we have the fylgja, which was the companion animal that reflected their hugr. Stronger individuals had stronger totems, and this is similar to the nefesh and the eshma and other traditions. And then we have the hamingja, which was the person's success in life formed by the hugr and would be passed down to close family members either in good or bad omen. This is very similar to the akash, or the karmic body. I've always felt that when someone close to me passes, that a piece of their light, a fragment of their effulgence is sort of instilled within me, and that might just be something weird that I do, or it might happen to every one of us. But that is the hamingja. Then we get into Valhall, Folkvanger, Hell, the realm of Varan, the burial mound, ghosts, sacrifice, many things like that. Then we get into sort of the final section that I'm going to cover, which is herbs and potions. So for those of you who are interested in like potions and elixirs and tinctures and things like that, here are some of the most common plants used at the time according to this book. Henbane was used in smoking or drinking, which activated its extremely toxic properties, assisting in the arrival of a trance-like state. Now, this says that it is toxic, so viewer discretion advised, and use caution and be safe. All of these are typically poisonous, or potentially poisonous rather. Mugwort was used as a diuretic in the household and in rituals for divination. Bog myrtle or sweet gale was used as a flavoring additive to many brews and as an antiseptic ointment. Meadowsweet was used as a cure for headaches or to reduce indigestion. The elm plant was used as a magical connection to the Alfheim realm and to carry love spells and other charms into the afterworld. Alfheim is sort of like elf home, is basically what it means. And there's the light elves and the dark elves, which is, I don't want to say the difference, but kind of the difference between Alfheim and Svartalfheim, or Svartalheim. And it says many other plants were used in conjunction with rituals as well as their household use, some connection to the dead and ancestors, and some to love and the living. Then we get into sacred numbers. The number 3 is portrayed in many ways. We have Ymir, Buri, and the cow, Amdula, Odhomla, are the 3 original beings. The 3 Norns, the 3 sacred wells. Before Ragnarok has its time, 3 long winters will ensue. Odin sacrificed himself 3 times at the Yggdrasil tree in search of the runes. Many of the sacred possessions of the gods come in 3. And then we have the number 9 being portrayed as the 9 worlds. Odin hangs for 9 days, the 9 mothers of Heimdall or Heimdallr. The great feast and sacrifice in Uppsala occurs every 9 years. Odin's golden ring, Draupnir, releases 9 golden drops every 9 nights, and Freyr is required to wait 9 nights before he can consummate his love for the giantess Gerdir. Then we get into spirit worlds, and we talk about whites. We talk about Uttasita, which is very important in my practice. I wouldn't call it necessarily Uttasita because it's a traditional thing that actually comes with history. What I do can be likened to Uttasita, and that many times it is outdoors, many times it is time alone and communion with subtle forces, for lack of a better word. But yeah, it gets into Uttasita, it gets into totemism, the Fylgir or Fylgja. Then the last section is on ethics and Norse morality, and then there's a conclusion. There's a free ebook download on the back of this book. Free bonus from HBA ebook bundle. And then there's a bunch of references and things like that. So the funny thing is, though, like, there's a lot of references in the book, but none of them are really like notated. They're just sort of like, they just dump a list of sources in the back of the book. Not the most scholarly approach, but at least it's not trust me, bro. Like I said, if you're wanting something more traditional, you might want a different work. This is more, it seems very syncretistic in its approach, which I can appreciate. But yeah, I hope that you've enjoyed this. If you're interested, go ahead and check the book out. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please leave them below. And yeah, have a good rest of the day or afternoon or evening, whatever time it is there. And I hope to see you in the next one. Take care.